This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Tunisian president dismisses government and suspends the country's parliament. China issues second highest alerts for typhoon and rainstorm. And kidnappers in Nigeria released 28 school children, although they still hold 81 others. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Vivia. Here are more stories making headlines this hour. In business news, mobile apps in Nigeria play a huge role in the transformation of the country's economy. And in your sport, we bring you the latest on the ongoing Rugby Sevens action in Tokyo. We begin our in Tunisia, where President Kais Saied was seen joining a crowd of his supporters on the streets of the capital, Tunis. That's following his decision to dismiss his government and suspend the activities of the country's parliament. Saied arrived to meet jubilant supporters who had filled the central Habib Bourguiba Avenue. This is the same street where the largest protests in the country took place leading to the 2011 revolution. Saied's decision came after violent anti-government demonstrations. CGTN's Adnan Shuashi has been following the developments from Tunis. He filed this report.
The head of state also lifted the immunity of members of parliament. He ordered the National Army to protect government buildings as well as the public radio and television in the capital city Tunis.
The constitution stipulates that the president can take necessary measures in this situation in order to save Tunisia, to save the Tunisian state and the Tunisian society. We are facing the most critical moments in Tunisia's history. These moments are the most dangerous. We will not allow anyone to mess with the state.
As tens of thousands of people celebrated the president's decision, Kais Saied warned that the military and the security forces will intervene anywhere to protect the population.
I warn all those who are attempting to hide and resort to arms. We will not be silent if anyone defies the state and its symbols. He who fires one bullet will be met by our armed military and security forces with a hail of bullets.
The Tunisian army prevented the Speaker of Parliament from entering the Parliament building in the early hours of Monday morning. Rachid Ghannouchi called on Tunisians to take to the streets to defy what he described as a coup.
Today, we are facing a coup attempt which uses the constitution. While the constitution is against such an act, the law does not authorize the president to order the dissolution of parliament. Even the emergency law does not give the president all these powers.
Tunisia's president sacked the prime minister and suspended parliament after violent mass protests nationwide on Sunday. Anger over the government's handling of a massive recent spike in COVID infections and deaths has added to general unrest over the nation's economic and social turmoil. Following President Saied's meeting with military and security commanders, a nationwide state of emergency has been extended until the end of January 2021. Parliament Speaker has called on political parties and civil society activists to defy the president's decisions. Adnan Shuashi, CGTN, Tunis.
We are staying with that story. CGTN's Daniel Arab Moy now looks at some of the key events in Tunisia leading up to the suspension.
The crisis in Tunisia started in 2010 after a street vendor, Mohamed Bouazizi, set himself on fire. Bouazizi's death sparked off nationwide protest over unemployment and repression. In January 2011, Zain El Abidine Ben Ali fled to Saudi Arabia as Tunisia's revolution took shape towards democracy, triggering an uprising across the Arab world. In November 2014, Tunisia held its first free presidential election. Beji Caid Essebsi was announced winner in the 2014 presidential elections. After months of failure to tackle Tunisia's economic challenges, Prime Minister Elias Fakfak stepped down. The collapse of Fakfak's government further complicated efforts to tackle Tunisia's key challenges. In his latest move, President Kais dismissed Prime Minister Etienne Mechichi and suspended Parliament.
After consultations took place with the Prime Minister and the Speaker of the Parliament, Article 80 of the Constitution was implemented and a number of decisions. The first decision was to freeze all the powers of Parliament. The Constitution does not allow its dissolution, but it does not stand in the way of freezing all its activities.
President Kais Saied says he will assume executive authority with the assistance of a new Prime Minister who is yet to be named. His critics have been quick to call his action in Parliament a coup. Years of declining state services and growing unemployment have led to unrest in the country. The global coronavirus pandemic has only made matters worse. Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN.
For further analysis, we're now joined by Shiran Grewal, professor at the College of William and Mary, based in Sicily, Italy. Shiran, thank you so much for joining us. Well, the Tunisian president sacking the Prime Minister Hichem Mechichi and then suspending Parliament after a day of anti-government protests. What is your take on his actions?
Thanks for having me. It's a power grab and really an attempted coup. The Constitution is clear that while the president can take exceptional powers for 30 days, he cannot freeze the Parliament in that time. The Parliament must be in a continuous session during those 30 days. Hence, several of the major political parties have condemned the coup and are now staging a sit-in outside of the Parliament, trying to get into the Parliament and hold a session in line with the Constitution. But that has also created a very tense situation. Now you have supporters of the president in the street and his opponents in the street. With both sides in the street, it raises the possibility of potential clashes between them.
Shiran, I just want to speak a little bit about how big a challenge this is going to be to democracy in Tunisia, but more than that, the Constitution, because you've mentioned a little bit about giving us details about that, but just speak to us on how this affects the Constitution of the country.
This is a major challenge to the Constitution and to Tunisia's young democracy. In my mind, it's the most serious threat it's faced since the protests in 2013. It's serious, first of all, because there is no constitutional court that could adjudicate whether the president is right or his opponents are right in their interpretation of the Constitution. There is no constitutional court. Instead, what the crisis seems to be escalating towards is dueling protests on the street, raising the possibility of clashes between them. But moreover, it raises the specter of how will the police and the military respond? Will they be loyal to the president and help him in this power grab, as it seems initially they have been, preventing the political parties from entering the parliament? Or will they stay neutral, as the military historically has, tending not to use force towards unarmed civilians? What we can hope for moving forward is that the army and the police stay neutral, and instead Tunisia's civil society enters the fray. Its labor union, its other organizations that back in 2013 had stepped in to mediate and have a dialogue between the political forces. What we would hope is that Tunisia's civil society does that again.
So now you've explained a little bit, Shiran, about why the president's move has been condemned by some as an attack on democracy, but and by his rivals as well, who've condemned his actions. But they've also been greeted with celebration in the streets by so many people, and we saw so many people in Tunis coming out in the streets and celebrating his move. What do you make of that?
And that is why this attempt is so dangerous, is because it has some level of popular support. The president himself, Kais Saied, was elected with 73% of the vote in a landslide election in 2019. Today, he is down to maybe 40% support in the polls, but still makes him the most popular figure in Tunisia. But beyond his own base, his actions have also appealed to other Tunisians who are simply fed up with the political process, fed up with the political parties and the government being unable to solve their problems and improve the economic situation, and taps into this anger towards the political parties, particularly towards the moderate Islamist party, Ennahda. And so there is a broad degree of public support for the president's actions, which makes his power grab that much more dangerous.
Sharon, thank you so much for all that. Sharon Goral, professor at the College of William and Mary, based in Sicily, Italy. Well, Typhoon Infa is bringing more trouble to China. The storm is slamming the Chinese coast again, making its second landfall in Zhejiang province, Pinghu. A severe flash flood alert has also been issued for the province. Hundreds of thousands of people have been evacuated and hundreds of flights have been cancelled in cities like Shanghai. The storm is moving northwestward at about 5 kilometers per hour. Rain is expected in large parts of China today, with eastern provinces seeing the heaviest storms. Well, Typhoon Infa has prompted evacuations in China's eastern province, Jiangsu. Nearly 98,000 people have been moved so far to safer areas. Some 15,000 boats were called back to harbor. City governments in Jiangsu are worried about high winds and inspected thousands of billboards and construction sites. Many cities have dispatched more workers to inspect seawalls and river dikes. Well, in central China, the recovery is underway after record rainfall in Henan province. Crews were working over the weekend to restore communication lines in Zhengzhou. Electricity is back on for hundreds of residential communities. Water has been restored to most areas. Several other provinces have sent recovery teams and large drainage equipment to deal with the floodwaters. Underground levels of hospitals and parking lots have been drained and are being repaired. Rescue work has been expanded to the suburban areas. In Gongyi City, rescue teams have cleared 5 of the 19 bridges that were damaged by flooding. Well, as floodwaters in Henan province recede, basic services are picking up again in Zhengzhou, one of the country's important logistics hubs. Our reporter Lia Jianhua gives us an overview of recovery efforts.
The capital city of Henan province is recovering from heavy rains that began July the 16th and reached a deadly peak on the 20th. Trains in and out of Zhengzhou are once again in operation. On the city's main road, traffic has returned to normal. Infrastructure is being repaired around the clock. Electricity and water supplies have been restored. Internet services are up and running. Postal services are getting back on track in one of China's vital national transport hubs. The city now is able to stand on its feet compared to less than a week ago when it was submerged by floods. But more importantly, postal services and delivery are getting back on track. Li Qiang was outside delivering packages when the floods hit the city on July the 20th.
The floodwater reached my chest. My company asked me to return as soon as possible. We didn't know it would be this bad. After we got back, we were requested to stay in the dormitory for safety concerns and to deal with emergencies. We helped some neighboring companies carry commodities to safe places to reduce losses.
Like all other enterprises, ZTO posted losses of over $70,000. Piles of packages that were inundated by the floods have to be covered and paid for by the company.
The flood water rose to my neck in about 20 minutes in the warehouse. No way we could salvage the packages. This led to severe damage to our packages and facilities. The headquarters of my company donated about $1.4 million to help us recover.
China Post, the country's biggest postal service provider, has recovered from the disaster, and a peak of delivery is expected today as roads to Henan are cleared.
Right after the city was flooded, we quickly launched the emergency plan and made an emergency adjustment to our delivery services of the whole network. During the period, China Post restricted the flow of express mails and packages headed for Henan. Postal trucks were requested to stay put. After July 23rd, our postal services started to recover.
As a vital national logistics hub, China Post in Zhengzhou delivers at least 1.2 million packages daily. Li Jianhua, CGTN, Zhengzhou, Henan Province.
Well, Germany was hard hit by severe thunderstorms over the weekend in areas already devastated by the country's worst flooding in nearly 6 decades. However, no further damage has been reported. More crowdfunding financial support continues to stream into the most devastated communities. Natalie Carney has more from Munich.
Another truck full of generous donations from the public for those struck by deadly floods earlier this month. Sebastian Frenkel, who lives in another part of the country, initiated a crowdfunding campaign when he heard about the devastation. He managed to raise more than 30,000 euros.
We are unloading everything now. We have brought emergency power generators, construction dryers, screed dryers. We have things for the children in a different car, and we hope people will benefit from it.
The full scale of the economic damage is still being assessed. Deutsche Bahn, which operates the country's train network, says rebuilding the roads and rails affected is likely to run close to 1.3 billion euros. Private businesses are also counting the costs. The rolling vineyards of the Ahr Valley were among the most seriously affected by the flooding. The area's Maischoss Altenaar wine cooperative has over 460 members, many of whom have lost both their homes and their livelihoods in the floods. Experts are blaming on climate change.
I can't give any figures or even dimensions. In any case, it is devastatingly threatening to the existence of our business. That has to be said quite clearly. The barrels that were still in the cellar, where there was actually wine in them, are probably no longer usable. We're now trying to save what can be saved.
Fingers are now being pointed and tough questions are being asked about both Germany's preparedness and emergency warning system, which many of the victims argue was in no way sufficient to protect property and save lives.
First, the fire brigade came and said, please leave buildings within a distance of 50 meters from the R or go into the upper levels. And then about 10 minutes later, if I'm not mistaken, there was a short siren alarm. I also briefly heard church bells. Then it was over. There was a deathly silence. It was spooky, like in a horror film.
Since, the federal government has been working to ensure that horror film is never experienced again. Following much criticism, much of which has been directed towards Berlin, Interior Minister Horst Seehofer has announced the introduction of a text messaging warning system for emergencies, a service that has existed here in Germany for several decades, but has not been in use due to privacy concerns. This warning system, already in use in several other countries, will now make it possible to send out emergency SMS text messages to all mobile network users in a defined area of concern without needing to know personal phone numbers. The text alerts, once operational in the next 12 to 18 months, will supplement other methods of issuing warnings across the country, such as sirens, smartphone apps, and radio bulletins. Natalie Carney, CGTN, Munich.
Over in India, the monsoon situation has eased in the western Maharashtra state. Residential areas, however, remain flooded, leaving more than 1,000 people dead. Rescue teams are using rafts and local boats to rescue stranded villagers. Meanwhile, in Raigad district, the rains have left behind a trail of destruction for the locals, with landslides caused by the monsoon. Indian environmentalists warn that climate change and indiscriminate construction in fragile coastal regions could lead to more disasters in the country.
There has been a lot of damage in the house. All the furniture, 2 refrigerators, clothes, bedding, and some documents also. Everything is ruined.
We had recovered 42 bodies till yesterday, so we have recovered a total of 43 bodies. According to villagers' statements, 70 to 80 people are suspected trapped, which means that we suspect 30 to 40 more bodies trapped under the debris. NDRF is working on a war footing in this operation.
We're staying with that story. Pracheta Sharma, a local journalist in India, joins me now from Mumbai. Pracheta, thank you so much for speaking with us again. Pracheta, what's the latest on the monsoon floods and landslides?
So the water has receded, so there's some respite for the rescue teams in terms of their search and operations. But there are still over 100 people that are reported missing. The number of casualties, of course, has gone up. But the rescue teams on the ground are able to reach those villages finally, which have been submerged in water for over 3 days now. The highways that were connecting Mumbai city to these villages and districts, which were shut off or cut off because of the floods, have finally opened up. So they've been able to send more transportation to make sure that people are getting evacuated soon enough. However, the reports that we're getting from the ground is that the locals are very agitated with the delayed response from the disaster management teams and the fact that there wasn't a red alert issued in time for them to evacuate their homes. And that's led to a massive loss of life and livelihoods in these areas, because these are primarily rural areas and they've lost a lot of their farmland in these floods. So had they gotten a prior notice from the administration, they would have been able to salvage some parts of their lives and even their loved ones in this. So we see a lot of stories coming in about the locals not allowing the rescue teams to work on the ground as much as they'd like to. But the police is on the ground and they're trying to control the situation as much as they can.
Brigitte, so one of the things that we reported in our earlier story before speaking to you was just how environmentalists in India are warning that they could be disasters like this in the future for India. Just speak to us about how authorities are dealing with this situation and just in terms of preparedness for should there be disasters like this forthcoming in the future.
Right. Just to give you a perspective of where these floods have taken place, this is the coastal belt of Western India, and a large amount of land here, which are the salt pan lands, are used only because this is a flood-prone state. Now, what's happened in the past couple of decades is that most of these lands have been erratically given away to builders, and there's massive construction which is indiscriminate, sometimes not licensed, and a lot of land space is lost in this process. Now, because of that, the authorities are now trying to rectify the laws and the regulations that we require to urbanize these spaces and preserve these land spaces that are essentially meant to contain water when floods of these times or when there's an unusual storm like this. Hence, we are getting reports from the authority that that right now there are people who are trying to ensure that the environmentalists are part of these coalitions and collaborations and taking them into account and hearing their voices in these stories.
Brigitte, thank you so much for all that. Brigitte Sharma, a local journalist in India, and she was speaking to us from Mumbai. Well, China says that relations with the United States are at a stalemate after talks between the two nations' diplomats. U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman is in the Chinese coastal city of Tianjin, meeting with Foreign Minister Wang Yi and Vice Foreign Minister Xi Feng. The Chinese side proposed two lists. One is of American policies that Beijing says needs correcting. The other is a list of key cases concerning Chinese officials and people in the U.S. Sherman is the highest-ranking American official to visit China since President Joe Biden took office. Washington says the goal of the talks is to keep a high-level communication channel open to avoid potential conflict. She blames faltering ties on the U.S., saying some Americans treat China as an imagined enemy.
目前呢，中美关系陷入了僵局。
The fundamental reason for the current relations between China and the United States have been a stalemate is that some in the United States regard China as an imagined enemy, an attempt to deflate the U.S. domestic political and economic dissatisfaction by demonizing China. They will not succeed in such goals by blaming China for the United States' deep structural problems. The U.S. crackdown on China will neither defeat China nor save the U.S. itself. The world today calls for solidarity and cooperation. The United States should choose to show mutual respect with China with fair competition and peaceful diplomacy.
Well, it's time now for us to take a short break. More news making headlines when we return, including kidnappers in Nigeria released 28 school children, another 81 still held. And President Nyusi of Mozambique thanks SADC for deploying troops in Cabo Delgado to fight insurgency.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live. We continue our news hour in Nigeria, where 28 more abducted students of the Bethel Baptist Secondary School in Kaduna State have been freed by kidnappers. The students were released on Sunday. CGTN's Enoch Sekolia has that story.
For several weeks, over 100 families in northern Nigeria have been praying and waiting for their children to come back home. And for some, their prayers were answered on Sunday. Their children were released by kidnappers.
The joy is too much. The joy is too much. I can't quantify the joy. God has done it. We said if God we serve, we will see our children, and we have seen him. He has brought this child. He will bring the rest.
In Nigeria, a wave of insecurity has left many worried. Thousands of men, women, and children disappear, many of them kidnapped by criminals. Heavily armed bandits roam the countryside on the outskirts of major towns and cities. For years, they have terrorized people along local highways, kidnapping and murdering people. The swollen legs of these school children are proof of the torture they had to endure while in the hands of criminal gangs.
I'm very, very happy. Very happy. I never believed I'll see her alive. I'm very, very happy.
The attack on the Bethel Baptist High School in the state of Kaduna was the 10th mass school kidnapping since December in northwest Nigeria, carried out by militants and more recently, criminal gangs. Though the latest release is seen as a step in the right direction, there are concerns about the safety of the other kidnapped children who are still in the hands of the abductors.
You know that a few came before. Altogether now, we have received 34 out of the 121. We are still expecting 87 to come back who have not come back yet. Yes, we call on all the people that knew about security apparatus and to assist us with information. How could we reach these people? What can we do?
This was another dark day for parents who are yet to have their children back.
My son is not here!
A first batch of 28 children was released 2 days after the raid. About 180 students attend the school and were sitting exams when the criminals attacked the institution. Nigerian authorities have attributed the kidnappings to what they call armed bandits seeking ransom payments. Schools have become targets for mass kidnappings for ransom in northern Nigeria by armed groups. Enoch Sekolia, CGTN.
Well, let's now head over to southern Africa, where Mozambican President Filipe Nyusi has thanked African nations supporting his country in the fight against insurgents. Recently, the regional bloc of the Southern African Development Community, or SADC, agreed to send troops to the terror-hit north province of Cabo Delgado. Rwanda has also deployed 1,000 troops. A jihadist insurgency has caused havoc in the country's north since 2017. CGTN's Wanja Mugai brings us the details.
President Nyusi was speaking on Sunday in the capital, Maputo. His address came after SADC formalized its military intervention in Mozambique.
We are at the crucial moment of the struggle of the Mozambican people against aggression which is waged against us by terrorist groups. And in the framework of regional solidarity, we are receiving support from some foreign partners.
Rwanda had earlier deployed 1,000 troops there as well to quell the insurgency.
Rwandan forces are in our country under the bilateral security agreement between our two countries. Rwanda's participation is part of the principle of solidarity for a noble and common cause. That is why it's priceless. It is about saving human lives, preventing the decapitation of people in Cabo Delgado, and the destruction of public and private property and infrastructure, but not only that.
Mozambique has witnessed increased terror attacks since 2017. An Islamic jihadist group, Ansar al-Sunnah, has been terrorizing people in the country's north, seeking to impose Sharia across Mozambique.
In Cabo Delgado, incursions by terrorists have resulted in over 2,000 deaths of our fellow citizens. Among the barbarities were acts of genocide, such as the one that occurred in April 2020 when the terrorists murdered 52 young people in the village of Shitashi in the district of Mudwimbe.
President Nyusi denied reports that he had not been keen to seek military aid from SADC, fearing that the intervention could escalate violence in the region.
I also heard some speeches in the assembly or from certain commentators who were complaining that Mozambique didn't accept international support. But as I said, we need careful consideration.
SADC approved a $12 million budget for its military mission in Mozambique. With the regional body and goodwill partners on board, Mozambique hopes it's now closer to winning the fight against insurgency. Wanjamungai, CGTN.
Well, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has eased some COVID restrictions in the country, including lifting a weekday ban on alcohol sales. The president made his announcement during a televised national address on the government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, especially the current third wave of infections. CGTN's Lisa Njamela reports.
President Cyril Ramaphosa says South Africa has passed the peak of the third wave of COVID-19 infections. He says this necessitates the easing of some of the lockdown restrictions.
The measures we put in place for the past 28 days, alongside the continued adherence of South Africans to basic health precautions, have been effective in reducing the rate of infection. The average number of daily new infections over the last week was around 12,000 new infections a day, which represents a 20% drop from the previous week.
Under adjusted level 3, people can travel between provinces for leisure. Alcohol sales are permitted, and nighttime curfew will start an hour later at 10 p.m. and end at 4 a.m. And schools will reopen this week. Restrictions imposed on indoor and outdoor gatherings will, however, be maintained. Announcing the new measures, the president told the nation that the country is fighting two battles. These are the coronavirus pandemic as well as the violence and looting that was witnessed in the past few weeks in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng provinces.
We're still counting the costs of this violence and coming to terms with the destruction that it left in its wake.
Ramaphosa listed a range of measures to assist businesses which have been hit by the pandemic, as well as those specifically affected by the recent unrest in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng. He also announced the reinstatement of the social relief grant. It will run until March 2022. On the vaccination front, according to the president, 10% of the population has received at least one jab of the COVID-19 vaccines.
We are now administering more than 240,000 vaccines every weekday. A month ago, this figure stood at around 100,000 vaccines per weekday. And as a result, we've now administered more than 6.3 million vaccines, with over 10% of our population having received a vaccine dose.
In the coming weeks, Ramaphosa says the government will substantially increase the rate of vaccinations. People between the ages of 18 and 34 will be allowed to register for vaccinations from the 1st of September. Yulisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Let's revisit our story from Mozambique, where the president there, Filipe Nyusi, thanking African nations for supporting his country in the fight against insurgents. We did tell you that SADC and Rwanda had sent troops to the region to help with the insurgency there. Well, to speak to us more about that story, we are now joined by London-based Director of the Security for Horn of Africa Institute, David Otto-Ndele. David, thank you so much for joining us. David, just speak to us about the implications of Rwanda and SADC sending forces to that region to help Mozambique fight with the insurgency there.
Yes, thank you. Just to be clear, yes, the Rwandans have deployed about 700 soldiers and 300 police officers, making a total of 1,000. The SADC forces haven't actually arrived. I mean, there is information that some of the troops from Botswana just arrived this morning. Now, what arrived was the advanced troops. I think that was last week from SADC. So, I mean, they are not actually involved in any field operation yet. So that has to be made very clear. Now, in terms of the implications of this, as you rightly said, you know, this is almost the first time we've seen African countries involved in other countries, you know, are going to Mozambique at this point in time to fight against jihadists. Rwandan forces have a lot of experience in peacekeeping missions, but this is the first time they are facing a terrorist organization. So I think the implication of this is that, you know, it's a welcome for Mozambique that has been experiencing the so-called Al-Shabaab insurgency for the past 4 years. And for SADC to then come up with this idea of deploying their forces to the region, it's a great initiative, and I think well coordinated, this, you know, will bring back some level of peace in the region. But again, you know, there will be challenges, of course. You know, these forces have to work hand in gloves with the host troops. They have to coordinate with the host communities. And, you know, part of the issues that they may encounter very early is, you know, the issue of welfare. If the Mozambican troops, you know, are not well taken care of, they will begin to compare themselves with the newly deployed forces. And that could backfire for the Mozambican government. But in terms of operations, Mozambique has to lead. This is a mission-specific operation. And I hope that, you know, there will be a great difference on ground.
Thank you so much for all that, David. David Otto-Ndele. He's based in London and he's the director of the Security for Horn of Africa Institute. Well, in the U.S., reports indicate that some states are recording their highest number of new coronavirus cases since the outbreak began. There are health experts who say that the country could be on the brink of another wave of the virus. They're also concerned that it is the unvaccinated who might be most at risk. Toby Muse reports.
There's increasing concern that we're on the verge of a fourth wave of coronavirus infections in the United States as the rate of new infections continues to soar. This latest surge is being blamed on the highly contagious Delta variant and the millions and millions of Americans who have so far refused to get vaccinated. Some health departments like Los Angeles County are requiring a return to wearing masks indoors, regardless of whether the people are fully vaccinated or not. St. Louis announced the same on Friday. Governors and the White House are voicing their frustration that the rise is coming from those who have so far refused to get vaccinated. As hospitalizations across the country surge, Florida's State Hospital Association says 95% of those hospitalized for COVID were unvaccinated.
There's considerable resistance to getting the vaccine in the public, although I'm starting to see some softening of that resistance over the last week.
Just under half of the country is fully vaccinated. In some states, that number falls to just 1 in 3. Friday saw the lowest daily average of people becoming fully vaccinated since the end of January. The US has registered more than 600,000 deaths and over 34 million cases. One model being looked at by the White House predicts, in the worst case scenario, if the infections keep rising and the rate of vaccination doesn't pick up, a return to a daily death toll that runs into the thousands. Perhaps the messaging on getting the vaccine is getting through. The White House Chief of Staff tweeted Sunday that 790,000 people were vaccinated in the past 24 hours, the largest number since the beginning of July. The White House is considering advocating that the vaccinated return to wearing masks and that the fully vaccinated with the Pfizer or the Moderna shot get a booster shot for the over 65s or those with compromised immune systems.
You've got to look at the data, and the data that's evolving from Israel and from Pfizer indicates that it looks like there might be some diminution in protection.
There's a growing chorus coming from private companies and local governments to demand employees get vaccinated. New York City's mayor is urging those companies to ensure their employees are vaccinated and suggested he will introduce similar measures for hundreds of thousands of municipal workers in the city. Toby Muse reporting for CGTN, Arlington, Virginia.
Your business news is coming up after this short break. Here's what you can expect. COVID-19 pandemic fuels growth of mobile apps in Nigeria. And Zimbabwe to include virtual assets in Securities and Exchange Act.
Taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Time now for the business news. Well, while COVID-19 has had a devastating effect on most sectors, for some economies, it significantly accelerated the growth of their mobile app markets. This was true for Nigeria. To give us further insight into how mobile apps are transforming Africa's largest economy, here's CGTN's Deji Badmois.
It's becoming difficult these days to find simple tasks that cannot be done without the use of mobile applications. From taxi hailing to shopping, logistics to financial transactions, ordering meals and much more. Almost anything can be done these days with just a few clicks on a mobile app.
It has actually opened the eyes of both the businesses and the end users to see there is a way in which you can actually make things easier for us by not exerting so much stress on my end as a user and also not imputing so much manpower as a business. So app actually bridged the gap, and this led to a rapid increase in app during the COVID-19.
At no time has the use of mobile apps become more crucial for Lagos-based journalist Mary Kanu than now. Since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic last year and the subsequent restrictions imposed by the Nigerian government, she now uses mobile apps more in accomplishing most of her tasks.
These apps have really helped. They've made life easier, less stressful. You know, you don't have to walk from one place to another. Just with owning a phone that has an access to the internet, and you're good to go.
Like Kanu, more people are doing away with the traditional means of getting things done in Nigeria and also across the continent. Their use is more common now, especially among young people, and the success of these apps are often hinged on their simplicity, but most times on necessity.
Mobile applications become more onerous than web applications because we see more of youths using their phone, downloading applications in which that actually allow them to have access to some services. So the potential to the economic growth is unlimited, so to speak. We're going to see more increase in development of app, the usage of it. People are going to work, even the old, let's say the age range of the elderly, they are already getting used to the use of applications.
With consumer spending on mobile apps hitting a record $64.9 billion in the first quarter of 2021 alone, experts say the growth may not be slowing down anytime soon.
This is only going to be on the rise. It's going to increase, and people are going to get used to enjoying themselves, Netflixing, and at the same time shopping on their phone and doing marketing somewhere and having or getting to have services come to their doorsteps. So as the time goes on, this is only going to increase exponentially at a GB rate.
Despite the growth in the use of apps, traditional means of doing things is still dominant in Nigeria and across the continent. But as the number of smartphone users grow, internet penetration increases, and the cost of data comes down, mobile apps are poised to become the new traditional way of accomplishing tasks. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Zimbabwe's government has approved amendments to a Securities and Exchange Act to include virtual assets like cryptocurrencies. This trade is thriving despite them being unregulated. CGTN's Farai Mokutuya spoke with a cryptocurrency trader about the growth of this asset class.
Tatenda Mataure started trading cryptocurrency in 2017 with just $30 which he since built into a portfolio worth thousands.
Whereas if you have acquired the right skill set and you sort of know what you're doing after a few trials and errors, you can make yourself maybe 50, 60 US in a day. Whereas, as I said before, you were like, this is what I'm working for in a month. So financially it starts to make sense.
In 2017, Zimbabwe's central bank shut down the country's first Bitcoin exchange, saying it did not recognize virtual currencies. However, that's not stopped traders from buying and selling them, especially as they offer a store of value and are a way of supplementing incomes in a high inflation environment.
The only way to monitor the cryptocurrency trades is by watching what's happening on social media platforms, such as WhatsApp groups, Telegram groups, whereas some days the groups will be like, hey guys, I'm selling $100 worth of Bitcoin, $200 worth of Bitcoin. Now you can wake up in the morning, guys will be like, I need 50,000 worth, I need $200,000 worth, the space is growing. And this is what we said to the regulator, that look, these trades are happening with or without you involved.
In recent weeks, monetary authorities seem to have begun warming up to cryptocurrencies. Previously, the central bank was hesitant to legitimize virtual currencies because of the high risk of potential fraud. But now, perhaps realizing that the global trade cannot be ignored, is working on a framework to regulate them. Meanwhile, players in the space are also actively engaging authorities.
If you want to do anything on a national scale, you have to have the authorities involved, you have to have the taxman involved, and you have to have some kind of deposit protection and structure to it. My company, Bitflix Fintech, we're working closely with the regulators, and we hope to have a very friendly solution available to the public very soon.
That will hopefully see cryptocurrencies added to Zimbabwe and US dollars, plastic and mobile money as the diverse modes of payment accepted here. Farai Mokutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Some sport action coming up after the show break. Here's what you can expect. We bring you the latest on the ongoing Rugby Sevens action in Tokyo. Well, let's begin with the latest from Tokyo, where South Africa Blitzboks have just defeated Kenya Sevens 14-5 in their second match of Pool C. 2 tries from Salvain Davids and Siviwe Soizwapi, coupled with successful conversions, helped the Blitzboks see out Kenya to keep their hopes for another podium finish at the Olympics alive. South Africa will face the U.S. in a Pool C decider on Tuesday, while Kenya still stand a chance for a top 8 finish and a quarterfinals berth when they face Ireland in their last Pool C match. Where early in the day, South Africa got off to a flying start as they defeated Ireland 33-14 in their opening Pool C encounter. The Blitzboks displayed a dominant performance against the Irish, despite the team being hit by COVID-19 in their pre-Olympic camp. They scored 5 tries through Zane Davids, Impie Visser, Justin Gedold, Chris Dry and Stedman Hunt, while Salvain Davids slotted 4 conversions. The Kenyan Sevens team, on the other hand, began their Olympics campaign with a narrow 19-14 loss to the USA. Kenya were trailing 12-7 at halftime after the U.S. scored 2 tries and converting 1 against Kenya's single try and conversion by Collins Injera and Eden Ajero. In the second half, a Jeffrey Olurch try and a conversion from Aguero weren't enough to match U.S. pace at full time. Meanwhile, star South African swimmer Tatiana Schoenmaker advanced to the women's 100-meter breaststroke final after finishing first in Monday's semifinal at the Tokyo Aquatic Center. Schoenmaker touched the wall first to win the second semifinal in a time of 1 minute, 5.0 seconds, edging American Lily King, who finished second. On Sunday, the South African made headlines by setting an Olympic record in the 100-meter breaststroke heat with a time of 1 minute, 4.82 seconds, beating American Lily King's record from Rio 2016. The 24-year-old, who is competing in her first Olympic Games, will also take part in the women's 200 meters breaststroke later this week. Well, Nigerian boxers have missed out on the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games. This due to the country's failure earlier this year to take part in an African qualifier in Senegal. Subsequent qualifiers were cancelled by the IOC over COVID-19 concerns. CDTN's Deji Badmo spoke with one of the boxers whose Olympic dreams had been dashed. Here is his story.
If there's one boxer who's been badly hit by the Olympics no-show for Nigerian boxers, it's Abdulafiz Oshoba. He's the country's current welterweight champion in the 69 kilogram. This was Oshoba back in October last year, preparing for an Olympic qualifier at a makeshift gym in Lagos. The 2019 All-Africa Games silver medalists had been hoping to end Nigeria's 24-year wait for an Olympic medal in boxing. But all of a sudden, the IOC cancelled the world qualifiers he and his fellow boxers had been preparing for, effectively putting paid to their years of hard work to be at the global sporting event.
I feel so sad for not going for the Olympics, because at times when I will look at the social media and I see some other African countries preparing for Olympics, I feel so sad that Nigeria is not going for the Olympics due to the qualifier that we didn't attend at Senegal, based on one reason or the other that I don't know.
Nigerian boxers' best chance of making it to the Olympics would have been during the African qualifiers that held in Senegal in February last year. But the country didn't attend the event for non-availability of funds, missing the opportunity to get a better ranking for its boxers.
We all know when it is an active year, an athlete that have prepared immensely for a competition and were unable to attend that competition is going to have a great impact on them. It's going to demoralize them. It's going to reduce every sense of motivations and interest they have in the sport. And come to think of it, some of these boxers might not even be opportune to be in 2024 Olympics, you know, due to the age factors and so many other factors that surrounds it. So it is, it's a great loss. That's what I would just, and it's so sad.
Even though he's very much disappointed he won't be in Tokyo, Oshoba says he's looking up to the 2024 Olympics in Paris.
I might have gone pro before the next Olympics, but I think with the new rules of the HIBA, pro boxer can also go for the Olympics game. So by then, maybe I might have turned pro or not, but I will try to be at the Olympics. The next Olympics, I will try to be at the next Olympics by God's grace.
His Olympic dream may have been interrupted. Oshoba is now recovering from the heartbreak and has his eyes set on the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, the United Kingdom next year, and the All-Africa Games in Accra, Ghana the year after. After those two, it will then be back to the 2024 Olympics. Quite a busy schedule ahead for this rising Nigerian boxing star. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Well, up next, a story the continent continues to be proud of. Africa won her first gold medal of the Tokyo 2020 Olympics when Tunisia's Ahmed Ayoub Hafnaoui stunned the swimming world by winning the men's 400-meter freestyle on Sunday. The North Africans now lead the continental medal chart after Mohamed Khalil Jendoubi took silver in the men's Taekwondo 58-kilogram category on Saturday. CGTN's Adnan Shuashi brings us this report from Tunis.
Ahmed Ayoub Hafnaoui has won Tunisia's first of Tokyo 2020 and the country's third ever Olympics gold medal in swimming. Hafnaoui won gold ahead of Australia's Jack McLaughlin and Kieran Smith from the US, who took silver and bronze. It was also Africa's first gold medal of this Olympics. The Tunisian Swimming Federation has described Hafnaoui's performance as a historic achievement.
Nobody was expecting this exceptional result, but we believed in our athlete. Our rising star continued his preparation for the Olympics despite the lockdown in Tunisia and the coronavirus crisis. Ayoub is the pride of all Tunisians. The gold medalist is the 100% Tunisian. Now we are waiting for the 800-meter challenge, which is his specialty.
Tunisia's 19-year-old Mohamed Khalil Jendoubi won Africa's first medal of the 2020 Olympics when taking silver in the men's Taekwondo 58-kilogram category. The local federation has also hailed the teenager as one of the best Taekwondo martial artists in the continent.
Our champion promised to win a medal in the Olympics, and he did it in Tokyo. His silver medal is a gift for Tunisia, the Arab countries and Africa. Khalil's performance was extraordinary. He was ready physically and mentally to reach the Olympic podium.
Watching the games on TV and online, Tunisians celebrated the country's first gold and silver medals. The North Africans now lead the African medal charts with those medals.
Although it was very late at night, I watched the swimming race with my family. It's very moving. Hafnaoui is the best swimmer in France, where he moved recently. He is a brave Tunisian champion.
Khalil Jendoubi has inspired all taekwondo and martial arts practitioners in Tunisia. I did not know him before, but I have become one of his fans. The medal in the Olympics is the dream of any athlete.
Tunisia's official delegation in the Summer Olympics is represented by 63 athletes in 16 disciplines. The North African state has now surpassed its tally from Rio 2016, where it won 3 bronze medals. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN,